Right,
The...
I think we're live on YouTube. So, this is Religious Debates discussing this time 20 questions atheists struggle to answer. We've got me, Joel Pearson, we've got Kent Schofield, and we've got Alan Kinsey again. And we haven't actually heard from Kent before, so Kent, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. So yeah, as he said, my name's Kent Schofield. I'm a resident of California in the United States. I was raised in a pretty fundamental Christian environment, Southern Baptist to be specific. I was never really all that informed of apologetics or anything like that. I was a firm believer. I regularly was part of all sorts of different church activities. I grew up in it, and I took it to be 100% real and true, the doctrines that we were taught. And it wasn't until I was about 22 or 23, I started to have any kinds of doubts. But I didn't have the first clue how to really apply critical thinking. And to make that point, what actually set me down the path, oddly enough, was I got hooked on the show Ancient Aliens. And I became convinced that it was true. I watched the show, I listened to their arguments, we saw the evidence, and I could not, for the life of me, think of a single way to debunk anything they were saying. And then I realized it conflicted with my religion, and I decided I needed to look into it and see how this could be, that I was convinced of two opposing things. And over time, I learned a little bit more about critical thinking, how to weigh evidence against critical thinking. I learned to avoid more of the logical fallacies that I was guilty of, and I rejected them both. And it took me about 3 or 4 years to get where I am now as an agnostic atheist, but a firm atheist nonetheless. I don't claim to know there is no God, but to any reasonable extent, I see no reason to think there is or could be. And that's where I'm at now.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a story that's been repeated many times over the years. I've noticed something odd about the YouTube feed. It's showing my face while you're talking, but I guess that's just a side effect of you not having any video.
Yeah, I thought it would throw my little emblem up there.
But finding all sorts of interesting things out about YouTube as we go. Okay, let's hit this list. So, number 1, what caused the universe to exist? You guys want to have a go at that?
Well, I guess since I'm the first, this is my first video, I'll take a crack at number 1. What was it again?
What caused the universe to exist?
So I'm of the persuasion that it's not even the correct question to ask. And that can be from 2 different perspectives. One could be because at the point of the Big Bang, where we think things kind of kicked off in the observable universe, time itself possibly didn't exist. So before doesn't actually apply. And it could also be because the universe itself could actually be without beginning. The Big Bang is not necessarily the beginning of the universe. So it could be that really we don't have to talk about what came before because it could actually have been forever.
You want to jump in on that, Alan?
Yeah. I think it's just. Sorry, am I coming up there or?
Yeah, we got your sound.
All right, I just see your face.
Yeah, it's a bit weird on the YouTube.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I'm a sort of agreement. Who knows what was before the Big Bang? I mean, if there was a Big Bang, that's our best evidence we've got. But who knows? It's the simple I don't know. As simple as that.
Let's see if I can change the settings on this thing because it's doing weird stuff. Damn it, YouTube. I also think that the whole beginning of the universe thing doesn't make sense because it must be time that starts right at the beginning.
Yeah, the thing is, time starts what is time? Because if before the Big Bang, you're talking about a time. Before is a time.
It's also completely irrelevant what about atheism. That's got nothing to do with atheism. Theism.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
physics and cosmology, isn't it?
Exactly.
And yeah, and you have to take into consideration the fact that we have a unifying theory of space and time. So if you're talking about the beginning of space, it also coincides with the beginning of time. So like you said, can't have a before time because it's a time-dependent concept.
I have no idea how to make YouTube show anything other than my face. So
When Ken's talking, I see a call to reason little
so
avatar coming up.
I'm looking also at the video feed on YouTube, and that is not showing anything other than me for some reason. I don't know how you
Right.
get to show all these other videos.
Well, we've got the blocks at the bottom, as far as I can see.
Yeah, but that's on Hangouts. That is not what is being broadcast to YouTube.
Okay, I'm not looking at YouTube. I'm just looking on the Hangouts.
I don't know if we've got sound coming through on YouTube. Nobody's chatting saying it's all broken or anything. So
yeah, do you think so?
That is Jessica.
Jessica, she ran away.
Yeah, so sure we'll probably get some comments back on that. So yeah, so what caused the universe to exist pretty much is irrelevant to theism or atheism. It's a question for cosmologists, really. And the answer, I think the real answer is we don't know. And also it may not even be a sensible question because a cause might not actually happen for the universe. Because time is part of the universe, so you can't have a cause for time. That's not logically sensible.
Yeah, agreed. It's just irrelevant. It's just like a move on.
To question 2.
Question 2. What explains the fine-tuning of the universe? Oh God, begging the question. Okay, go for it, Ken.
That was the first thing that came to my mind was question begging. So
yeah. So how do you explain? Maybe we should answer it that way. How do you explain the fine-tuning of the universe?
What is fine-tuning?
So the fine-tuning argument is generally theists saying, "Oh, it couldn't possibly have happened by accident that life exists and that things can cohere and there's a logical sense to the universe." So what are the odds that the universe would end up in this sort of way?
Exactly. So if it's fine tuning, that means there must be a hell of a lot more life out there. It should be life on just about every planet. If the universe was fine tuned for life, there must be life on every other planet.
There also ought to be only one planet if we're so important.
And I'd have an interesting stance, a thing that I've been thinking about in regards to this because it's one of my biggest pet peeves, this fine-tuning argument. For me, they say it's impossible for things to have fallen the way that they have in order for life to arise. And I say, well, how do you know? We have one data point and it is the way it is. So to me, you can't say it's impossible when you're in the situation in which it has occurred. You have to show some mechanism by which you can prove that the tuning of the universe shouldn't be the way it is. We've got one universe and it is as it is. So it's question begging to assume that it should be any other way.
Yeah, to me, the answer to that is the anthropic principle. It's that in a universe in which we're here to ask the question, the odds of a universe existing in which we can be here to ask the question is 100%. It's like dealing out a deck of cards, looking at the order in which they were results and gone, well, that's impossible because the odds against that are 52 factorial. But the odds that a deck would be dealt out in some order is 100%.
Exactly.
Yeah, there was what's the name? Adams said something. The water in a hole. This hole was meant specially for me. What a fantastic hole this is! It fits me perfectly.
Douglas Adams' puddle metaphor is perfect for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are.
That was interesting.
Shape to the world. We got.
I actually, ironically, I actually invented. I say this without knowing, I invented almost the identical analogy, and a week later I heard the analogy for the first time from him. I had never heard it, and I was coming up with a way to try to explain it with someone, and I didn't say a puddle, I said more like a glass full of water, but I thought it was pretty interesting that I had just kind of come up with a very similar analogy myself, and then discovered that obviously it was older, I just didn't know about it. But
fluids taking on the shape of their container in water is the most common one, so it's a great one.
Yeah, Douglas Adams is probably a very good read. It's very tongue-in-cheek where religious belief is concerned, especially the Babel fish and God disappearing in a puff of logic. I see we've got Brad. Hello, Brad. How you doing?
I'm all right, buddy. Good to see you.
Oh, you lost your African accent, didn't you?
Oh, a long time ago when I was in the UK.
Oh no, that's bad.
I noticed you still sound like a Cape ape.
Oh, thanks. A Bulawayan.
Yeah. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Brad.
hello.
Do you want to quickly introduce yourself before we go further in?
You probably don't need to know a whole lot. My name's Brad Jackson. I was born in Cape Town, South Africa. Lived the first portion of my life in Africa. Moved to Europe, spent a good time there, and then moved to the States, where I now live and work religiously. Not a terribly religious background, but I was brought up thinking that I should be religious, and never really had a reason to question it until I got into my teens, and then started looking at the claims being made and the evidence for them, and wondering how I had ever considered any of it to be true.
Yep, it's a common story. Also, do you have any idea how I get my face off the screen and put someone else's on?
Maybe throw up your avatar so you're not so.
I wasn't fun in that.
You'll just be the face. You'll be the face of our group.
And then it'll only be me on there.
Let's see if I do that, do people disappear?
What's happening for me is whenever somebody else talks on my Hangouts view, I get that person's avatar. And whenever nobody is talking, it reverts back to you.
Well, so the YouTube screen is literally just showing my face, but Hangouts is actually switching between whoever's talking.
Yes.
All right. So YouTube, we're only seeing your face. That's ridiculous. Well, actually, I'm only seeing you now. I haven't even popped up myself. So I don't know what you've done now.
On my end, it's still going between who's talking on the Hangouts for me, but yeah, I'm also not able to access the YouTube right now. So
I'll leave the camera on. We'll worry about figuring out an alternative.
Oh, is that why you disappeared?
Yes.
You'll just be the face of the group.
That's a wonderful thought, isn't it?
You're a mascot.
I've always wanted to be a mascot monkey.
Perhaps it's just because you're the host. Although it shouldn't be. You should be at the bottom.
Let's have a look at question number 4. I think we've question number 3. I think we've.
Did we ask Brad question number 2?
We didn't. Do you want to answer question number 2, Brad? The fine tuning of the universe.
I actually did answer it when I was chatting with you, trying to get into the Hangout, and refer to Douglas Adams, and he actually did a pantomime of that once. I don't know if any of you saw it, but
yeah,
it was pretty darn hysterical to watch, and I think extremely valid, and it answers. That's how I would answer the question: is where's your evidence that it is fine-tuned?
It's a good answer. Yeah. So we've got number 3 is why is the universe rational? I think I've got an answer for that, but anyone else want to try?
Who says it's rational?
Bingo.
I see no rational. I see nothing rational about the universe.
I would say logically consistent in that logic itself works is usually the way that they'll throw around it. It's the argument that God must exist because things make sense.
My take on that has always been, for something to be in a single state of existence at one point in time, it has to be consistent. So if you're looking at one single coherent or consistent realm of reality, which we would call the universe, it just follows that it would be consistent. And if it's consistent, then you can come to, in theory, you can come to understand it. That's rationality.
Yeah, to me, I would say that life couldn't exist without consistency, without physics making sense and therefore producing chemistry and therefore producing biology. So it's the only kind of universe in which we could exist. So again, it goes back to the anthropic principle. It goes back to begging the question.
I'd ask this. What would a universe look like in which logic didn't work?
Yeah, exactly. Disappear in a puff of logic.
Douglas Adams again.
Yeah, can always go back to Douglas. Okay, anybody else want to take a stab at it, or should I move on to the next one?
Move on to the next one.
Yeah, that was quick. Number 4 is...
It's going to get quicker.
Probably. It's going to be the same fallacies every time. Number 4, how did DNA and amino acids arise? Now that, again, is not a question for atheists. That is a question for chemistry, really. And
Yeah,
understanding,
it's all about complex chemistry.
And I would again say I don't know. It's got nothing to do with atheism. Wow, what do I know about chemistry?
The inference is it's the argument from complexity, just in different clothes.
Yeah, it's the same as the fine-tuning argument. But so what is DNA? Deoxyribonucleic acid. It is just a collection of RNA with a few more pieces.
Yeah.
And it's all down to the first self-replicating molecule, which is inevitable in a universe 14 billion years old with the vast scale. We've got visible galaxies, about 2 trillion, each with maybe 100 billion stars or more. It's a ridiculous number of planets. And somewhere in all that time, something's going to happen. So that it just tells you, if there was a universe consistent with, say, a theistic world, you have the flat Earth model with the only planet being this one.
That's center of the universe, the center, everything going around us.
Yeah, my take on the question is, it's essentially, if I can't come up with an answer to this, and a theist uses that as part of their argument against atheism or for theism, it just turns into an argument from ignorance.
Yeah,
you don't know what it is, therefore I get to insert God as an explanation. You would have to show the means by which God created DNA.
It's boring when we all agree on things. We should argue more.
All right, I'll play devil's advocate on one of these. I'll try.
The thing is,
so hard.
Bad that you can't really argue for them. It's just failures of logic. Let's try number 5. Where did the genetic code come from? I'm pretty sure that is exactly the same question as number 4.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
It's again an argument from ignorance. You can't explain this, therefore God.
Yep.
So the genetic code, in the sense of, I think this is information theory, the idea that information is somehow some intrinsic thing that comes from God instead of a label that humans put on certain patterns that they find in nature.
As an interesting point, I believe it's either already happened or happening, or it's happening later today, is that the great debate community is having a talk about, is DNA a code? That's actually one of the conversations they're having here some point during today, I believe.
I think DNA becomes a code when we start to use it as a code, but it's all down to human labeling. So if humans didn't exist, or say if anything rational capable of understanding it didn't exist, so for example, if something else other than humans evolved, then they could, of course, call that information. But information comes from humans labeling patterns. So if codes, like say computer code was just something naturally forming, there's no sentient being around to go look at it and go, oh, that's code, that's information. I can decide that every atom in the universe and the position of every electron is information if I want to. Or you could just say that's random patterns with no particular meaning.
It's all actually, every atom, every molecule in the universe is part of the code of the current quantum state of the universe. You follow what Sean Carroll says in The Big Picture. That's pretty much how he talks about it.
Yeah, so everything is information if you decide it is information. For example, static on a TV, well, not that you get that anymore, but on the older, the aerial-based TV systems, you get static on the screen, and I think 1% of that static is the cosmic background radiation. So you could say that is information, because although that is a random scattering of radiation, there is meaning to that. There's something that we can gain from examining.
So if you had 1 million monkeys with 1 million typewriters, you might not come up with the works of Shakespeare, but I can promise you there'll be some English words in there and some Swahili words in there, and probably even a little bit of Chinese. And there's going to be, quote, information in there, unquote. The only thing that makes it information versus gibberish is whether we recognize it or not.
Well, the monkey typewriter thing is more of a lesson in infinity than it is in
I'm just borrowing the analogy to point out that you can produce an awful lot of stuff, and somewhere within that stuff there is going to be something that we, as you said, recognize as a pattern. Yeah, the amount of stuff that we have, as you referred to earlier, billions and billions and billions of objects, and if you start getting into the micro and the subatomic levels, you now have an absurd amount of, quote, information, unquote. There's going to be something in there somewhere that looks like something to us.
Yeah, so let's say, for example, in a scenario where you do the monkeys on the typewriters thing, and they're not golden tamarins because their fingers would be too small and they can't press the monkeys that can actually do that's a Bill Bailey analogy there. Say we have that scenario, and say they type out the complete works of Shakespeare in English in a world where English doesn't exist. That is not information then, is it? That's just gibberish.
Not recognized.
So it's all about us imbuing that with information capacity. So it goes back again to the perception from a human.
It's a lot like numerology, really. Take any random set of numbers and you can find meaning in it if you try hard enough.
Sure.
Yeah. If you twist things enough, then you can try and make some meaning out of it. It's apophenia, isn't it? It's our tendency to see patterns where there are in fact none.
And to
I think that's one of the problems. Go ahead, Brad.
We also ignore patterns that don't fit our expectations. An example would be people that have triskaidekaphobia.
I have no idea what that is.
Fear of the number 13.
Yes, cool.
So it's an actual thing. So, okay, people are terrified of the number 13. They won't sit in row 13. They won't stay on floor 13 in a hotel. Okay, how many grams of carbohydrates are in the piece of apple you just ate?
13.
How do you know? If you knew, would you have not eaten the apple? And since you didn't, does it matter?
Those people need to switch to an analog system. You'll never get a perfect 13. Okay, so the question after that is down the same dark tunnel of ignorance. Number 6 is, how do irreducibly complex enzyme chains evolve? Yeah, evolve. That's, again, the same thing, evolution. I mean, they kind of answered their own question there.
Well, that's begging the question. Nobody's ever confirmed a case of irreducible complexity.
Yeah. So, and in fact, every irreducible complex claim has been disproved, and I think in a court of law as well. That was rather thoroughly destroyed.
That was Dover versus Kitzmiller.
Yes, remember that one. So that's really out of date. They've not really thought that one through.
I guess we can go ahead and make the popular example. If anyone's listening that hasn't heard it before, the example that was given was the mousetrap, the basic mousetrap, and how if you took any one piece away, it would no longer be a functioning piece of equipment in any way. And the non-theistic side, you could say the side against intelligent design, came back and showed that you could take away 2 pieces and actually still use it as a tie clip. It no longer functions as a mousetrap, but it does have other functionality. It's not completely without function. And that same concept can apply to anything else. The complex molecular motors they've shown, tried to use as examples of irreducible complexity. You take away little parts, they can't do what they do now, but they can do something else.
Yeah, there's a special word for the evolution of a change of function. I can't remember what it is, but I remember Dennett writing about it using evolution as an algorithm that can be applied more than just to biology. But yeah, that's just a silly question. I hope we get some better quality questions soon. But
who chose this? Who chose these questions?
I picked the top Google results on questions atheists can't answer, and I think the quality is representative of all the other lists like this. Anyway, it's a silly thing to say.
It sounds like something Ken Ham would be on the go with.
I think SJ. I've seen SJ Thomason do something like that as well, but and Matt Slick, I think, had a go at it. They've never managed to come up with a decent list. Let's try this next one then. How do we account for the origin of 116 distinct language families? I don't even know where to start.
Evolution.
I mean, yeah,
Evolution, that's what I was going to say.
Languages evolve in the same way as biology does. You get splits. Not to mention that all you have to do is have the first, the evolution of the first language type. Even animals actually have certain languages to them. Birds have got accents in different parts of the world of the same species. So it just goes nowhere, that question.
All you need is an original language, at least. You need time, and you need cultural separation.
Yes.
That's all you need.
I mean,
yeah, isolation.
Example,
there you go.
England, I think pre-Chaucerian England, you could barely understand each other because people didn't travel very much. And the dialects, even now, we've got very distinct dialects all over England. I can barely understand a Geordie, for example.
It makes two of us. I struggle with a lot of languages here.
Yeah, so
a lot of accents or dialects.
Not only does that not need an answer, and it's completely irrelevant to atheism, and maybe they're confused and they think that evolution in some way is atheistic.
Are they? I wonder, are they trying to allude to the Tower of Babel with that? Is that supposed to be their answer from where all the languages came from?
Yeah, they might be going down that road, which still wouldn't make any difference.
No.
Because if they didn't have an explanation, it would just mean they didn't have an explanation. It doesn't insert gods anywhere. It's a complete train wreck of an argument. Sorry, were you saying something then?
I started to, and it looked like I was muted. Kent stole my thunder, kind of. That's where I was going. Is what's their explanation? And if it is the Tower of Babel, then there's a few problems with that they need to kind of explain. Not the least of which would be the supposed reason for the diaspora of language was that the tower was too high.
Wasn't it about 20 feet high or something stupid?
Well, it wasn't very big, and it certainly wasn't as big as some other structures on the planet, and certainly not high enough to reach the Kármán line. Or, I mean, we've been a whole lot higher since, and I haven't noticed any change in any of the languages.
Maybe God got smart and moved a little further away.
Just a one-time deal.
You know why? It's because of all those iron chariots driving up and down the roads with the skyscrapers. You can't get near them.
Yeah.
There was an interesting point I think Dark Matter made about that. So the story of Babel, the reason that God decided to smite the humans wasn't because of the tower, it's because they were cooperating. It explicitly mentions the cooperation being the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if everybody could agree or speak the same language, then there's no stopping us from becoming gods. Apparently, that was also the sort of argument.
Even if we speak different languages, I mean, the Large Hadron Collider's got over 100 different countries worth of people working on it together.
We essentially have worldwide communication right now. So, I mean, if that kind of communication and networking was what God didn't like, why are we not seeing that hand in this again?
Yeah,
from a God that supposedly doesn't change.
And what's not to like?
These are actually questions that Christians can't answer, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. We could make our own list.
We just use this list. They can't answer these questions.
We only need one.
Yeah, true. Let's have a look at the next one. Number 8 is, why did cities suddenly appear all over the world between 3000 and 1000 BC? I think they
Did
have
they?
a strange definition of suddenly. I mean,
Anyone ever heard of Göbekli Tepe?
So I'm guessing this is something to do with the word city in the sense of that much population. So if you're looking for cities appearing though, that's got to be 11,000, 12,000 years ago is when you first start to get large groups of people because of the agricultural revolution. And that's when they started.
Yeah, agricultural revolution.
Yeah, you got the development of mathematics around then, so that they could try and feed all the people by harvesting and distributing it fairly and so on. So that's when you start to get real writing going on, cuneiform, I think. You start to get Sumer shortly after that. And what's the other one? Acadia, like Akkad or something. So that's the development. So this timescale is way off. And also, 2,000 years is not suddenly. It's a mess.
I think it's Guinness aiming at the 6,000 year age of the Earth.
Yeah, so this seems to be written by someone who's phenomenally ignorant. I mean, we've got ritual burial sites 40,000 years old, so I have no idea what they're thinking with this. It's
On a point, I guess we could throw out against the Christians is you're saying the first cities were between 3,000 to 1,000. That puts us back about 5,000 years. They're saying Adam and Eve was 6,000 years ago. So what was the city of Ur that, they went off to after they were kicked out of the garden? That city was already there 6,000 years ago. So that already predates their question. This isn't well thought through at all.
I don't think any of it's been thought through at all. Yeah. At least the humorous questions. Number 9 is, how is independent thought possible in a world ruled by chance and necessity?
Somebody define chance?
I mean, yeah. So necessity, well, that's why thought is important, because you need to be accurate about your decisions. You need to make decisions that will result in you achieving your goals, which means you have to have logical thought. So it says independent thought specifically. Are they going down the whole free will thing?
It could be. It's very, very poorly defined, the question, very poorly stated. It's hard to even answer because it's so wide and ill-defined.
Yeah, and when they say independent thought, are they expecting some sort of hive mind? Because that's not happening.
I'm
maybe
more
mechanical.
troubled.
Is that kind of what they're like? Our thought is mechanical. How can we trust it? How can we account for the fact that we can think unique things, I guess?
Yeah, well,
I don't know.
Ultimately, it is mechanical, but it's complex to such a level that you can't predict yet what someone's going to
Precisely.
I'm more troubled, to be honest, by the begging the question, and that they're saying that the world is ruled by chance and necessity. Who said it? I don't see the world ruled by chance, but I do hear the word chance misused a lot in discussions of evolution. Oh, it just a chance that something changed and caused a mutation and so forth. Well, the random act of mutational damage to genetic material, sure, that's chance, but the survival of that particular individual or not isn't chance. And I think it's being misused in the same here.
Yeah, it goes down logical paths where chance and natural selection work together. Yeah, it's a kind of an incoherent question again. Let's move on to the next one. I hope maybe one of these will actually give us some decent discussion points. You never know. Number 10.
Don't hold your breath.
Yeah, number 10 is, how do we account for self-awareness? I think they need.
I always just go back to evolution with that.
Well, yeah, so evolution. So self-aware beings are more adaptable. More adaptable beings are more likely to reproduce and survive, and so on. So there you go. You get the most adaptable one is the one that survives. So self-awareness in the sense that we don't fully understand how subjectivity works. So you don't understand the difference between making a computer brain with a pain switch that feels pain in the sense that a circuit is activated, but then there's no, as far as we know, there is no subjective feeling to making pain in a computer system. It would work. But in humans, there is the difference between data coming in saying, I see a red light switching on, and data coming in the sense of pain that gives you a sense of urgency that means you subjectively feel something, you can't switch that input off. So I guess you've got that, but then it's just, you account for it by the fact that brains are so complex in humans and in other animals with a complex brain anyway, that you've got all these subroutines and subroutines going down layers of objects that just make it extremely complex. There's just this whole behavioral matrix that you're only seeing from the inside.
And then there's the obvious point that, again, theism doesn't really provide much of an answer for that too. Why would we be self-aware under theism?
God did
How? Go on.
It's God. That's the theist's answer to that.
God did it.
Yeah, God did it.
I mean, that's
one of the serious problems for this for theists is the existence of the other great apes. Our cousins, because the fact
but we're not
they
apes.
are intelligent and they're capable of communication.
We're not apes. We are made in God's image. We're totally different, even though we're 98% the same.
Yes, the place where the rising ape meets the falling angel, I think Terry Pratchett said.
I have another little bit of a question to add to this, sort of a thought experiment, if you will. It's been demonstrated that plenty of other organisms have self-awareness. They recognize themselves in mirrors. Okay, we eat some of them. So I'm not sure how self-awareness is uniquely human nor special if God's just dishing this stuff out to everything and everyone.
Yeah, dogs are a great example. People really empathize with dogs, and they're they're extremely self-aware, aren't they? Some dogs are incredibly intelligent.
Sure. But I've also seen recently where an octopus was demonstrated to be self-aware.
Yes, if an octopus had evolved in such a way that the mother didn't die when it was giving birth or laying eggs, because they sit for about 6 months, I think, protecting the eggs until they hatch, and they don't eat in that time because they have to protect them. And they die before they can actually teach the next generation. If they hadn't gone down that evolutionary path, and if they'd actually been able to survive while hatching, then they could have taught the next generation on. And octopuses are actually quite intelligent, so they could easily have risen to be the dominant force on Earth.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's octopods, but certainly squid have better eyes than we do. So in many ways, they've been given evolutionary advantages that we lack, or if you don't care to call it evolutionary, they have been simply given advantages that we lack. Looks like there were some favorites being played.
I think pretty much everything has better eyes than we do. We've got water-based eyes.
Very true.
I think every one of us is wearing glasses right now.
Yeah. Is it Ken Ham who says the eye is a perfect creation by a perfect creator while wearing glasses?
But to Brad's point, the squids, they have better eyes than us. Other creatures like birds, eagles, they have better eyes than us. But you can go a step beyond that. Some other organisms have survival adaptations. You can call them gifts that we don't have, that help them survive and flourish in ways that we couldn't even imagine. You've got insects that can see into the ultraviolet, and birds that can fly, and plants that can live years dormant. For that matter, even parasites that can live dormant for decades. And yet we go a few days without food and we die.
Yeah, we're pretty weak on the whole scale. Our main adaptation advantage is sweat.
Yeah, that's our bodily thing. I just hear all the time, how can you think that we weren't specially designed? Look how smart we are. And I'm just like, well, that's kind of how we evolved. That's our adaptation. That's what got us where we are. If it had been birds who turned out as smart as we, then they would be the ones running the show, and we'd just be a bunch of stupid monkeys trying to keep up.
Well, our brain development actually happened after we evolved. So we didn't actually get the brain expansion until after we were already successful as a species. That's kind of an after effect of having being so successful that we eat a lot of meat and we were able to be able to grow those extra large brains. It's really interesting studying the evolutionary history of humanity like that.
Are you trying to say vegetarians are stupid?
I do worry about vegetarianism in the sense of getting enough nutrients for particularly developing baby brains and young children's brains. Because there's certain things in the fats in meat that develop your brain, which you need to make sure you have vegetarian alternatives for. But I am sympathetic to vegetarianism, and I am planning on reading Peter Singer's book about animal rights. I suspect that I shouldn't be eating meat, but I haven't really given it enough thought, and it's one of those things I do need to explore further.
Yeah.
It's like Sam Harris says, and I'm on the same page as Sam Harris in that I cannot morally defend my consumption of meat, but I haven't taken the steps I feel I should to eliminate more of the meat from my diet. I eat very little meat anymore. It's, well, a low variety of meat, but I have meat in almost every meal.
Well, we're extremely close to the point of, I don't know if it's fair to call it manufactured meat because it's grown from original living cells, but we'll call it laboratory burgers. We're very close to being able to make that a widely available choice. And so
I've been very excited.
When it does happen, I will be one of the first on the bandwagon, I can assure you, because I do find it morally undefensible to kill animals. On the other hand, it's also, in my view, an unfortunate necessity for us. So
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it's a rock and a hard place. And the vegetarians and vegans arguments are not without merit, but they're also not fully developed if you're going to say, well, I'm just going to be a vegan because I like animals. Okay, you're an animal too, and you're harming yourself. That's not a very smart thing to do.
Yeah, we do need to make sure we have the right kind of intake. I think veganism, vegetarianism is on the rise, and as that gets more invested in, they'll be cheaper, because it is actually cheaper in general to avoid eating meat. What worries me, though, is the Temple Grandin approach. So she said, if we didn't use these animals as food, and the way we've, the way we've evolved and we sort of domesticated them to the point where they cannot survive in the wild, we will exterminate them. So at this point, stopping eating meat is actually going to be, well, so I guess we could still keep them as pets or, that kind of thing, go down that road. But economically speaking, we would probably cause the extinction of all those animals if we stopped using them in some way. So I don't have a problem with giving animals a good life and eating them after they die. I do have a problem with the sort of torturous conditions of keeping them, chained up, incarcerated, and treating them viciously, which unfortunately is the most efficient way to handle animals.
The worst sort of cruelty is probably chicken farms. That is the worst thing I've ever seen.
Oh.
The slaughtering of chickens and the conveyor that they sort of go down. I mean, half the time, the animals are not, they're plucked and running around with broken legs, and they're not even dead yet. Really, that when I witnessed that was enough to put me off chicken and make me a vegetarian, but only for about a week.
Yeah, I'd one up that two times over. One would be veal farming, and the next thing would be foie gras, which is absolutely the most horrendous abuse of an animal I've ever witnessed.
Overfeeding them until they die from
forcibly shoving a tube down into its gullet and ramming food in there. Imagine if somebody put a 5-pound tomahawk steak on your plate and made you eat it, all of it, and then another one, and then another one. I don't think you'd enjoy the experience. In fact, I'm not sure you'd get all the way through the first one and still be feeling comfortable. But this is done to them daily. It's horrendous, and it's one of the few things where I've actually said, you know what, every opportunity I get, I will boycott and eschew establishments that serve foie gras.
Yeah, it's very difficult to tell. So in that particular case, it's really obvious, but it's quite difficult to tell the difference between meat which has been done ethically, if there is such a thing, and meats where they've just gone down the maximum output, minimal ethics route.
Agreed. Anybody want to talk about halal while we're here?
Well, I was going to say we've gone well off topic at this point. Because I think we're going to go back onto it, actually, because there are some morality questions coming up. So
Right, get back on to more questions here.
So that was self-awareness, right? So we're on question number 11, which is, how is free will possible in a material universe?
It isn't.
Demonstrate that we have free will, please.
In what kind of universe would free will actually be possible? So say I don't have the ability to teleport myself wherever I want to go, so my will is restricted by material laws. But already you've taken free will out of it. You don't have free will, you have restricted will.
That's kind of what I thought they were getting at with the independent thought thing. Maybe they were going down the free will path, but now they're saying free will here in a separate category. So maybe they're repeating themselves, or maybe misunderstood the other question.
Has everybody read Sam Harris's Free Will piece?
I have not. I do want to read that. Is it good?
It's
very good.
It's a fairly short read, too. It's not hard to get through at all. But it does pose some extremely interesting questions, and it set me down a path of a thought experiment at the end of which I concluded there isn't any free will at all.
Yeah, I've got a few Sam Harris books, and he has touched on it. But yeah, to me, it is a question of, well, ultimately, our thoughts are deterministic, but at the same time, they're so complex that we can't predict them, which means it's effectively we've got the illusion of free will. So
yes,
we may as well act as if we have free will, because our thoughts.
One of his points is that you can, I forget the exact wording, but more or less it's you can act in the way that you want, but you can't want to want what you want. The wants are free from your control. You can't choose that you want to be that you want to like a certain kind of music. I mean, yeah, you can force yourself to do it, but if it happens on its own, it's not something that you controlled. You had no will in the matter, and ultimately everything leads back to that point. Anything that you think you had a hand in leads back to a point where it just is, and you didn't choose it. It just happened.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think an analogy is stopping smoking. You have to want to stop smoking more than you want to smoke. And ultimately, you can't choose that.
There's more to it. It's a little bit deeper than that. That does involve a certain amount of what appears to be decision making, but there's stuff at work that's a little deeper than that. As an example, what's your favorite color?
In my case, green.
Okay. Did you choose to like green? Could you choose to like purple better than green?
Never.
I mean, you can't
choose. You can't subject yourself to purple.
Yes, but you can't change the fact that
you like it.
You'll still prefer green at the bottom, and you don't choose that.
What
so where's that come from?
I could choose to subject myself to situations in which I would be more likely to appreciate purple, or sort of change your surroundings, change your energy, so on. So you can manipulate your surroundings to the point where your wants will change, but you would have to want to do that in order to make it happen anyway.
But the actual occurrence of your wants changing is not up to you, or you would just do it in the first place.
Yeah,
if you could say, I like green, but I would rather like purple, you can't just flip the switch and now all of a sudden purple is your favorite. You have to find some way of making that stick and be true. You can say, oh, now I like purple better, but making it true, you can't control.
Yes, so I think this is begging the question again, because the way it's phrased is, how is free will possible in material universe? And the answer is, well, it's not. So that's the question doesn't make sense again.
Yeah, demonstrate that we have it, and I'll think about answering the question.
But they seem to make a really big deal about free will being important, but it's not really. The difference between a genuine free will where you could destroy the universe with a thought, and free will in the sense that, well, you are restricted by physics. There isn't there's no contest. We were obviously stuck in a universe where we can't destroy it instantly, otherwise some idiot would have done it by now.
Well, Joel, I think I can take advantage at this point and get some of the conflict going on that we were hoping for, because when you're talking about free will, you're talking about free action, the free action to destroy the universe or to teleport across the globe. That's kind of, to me, that's not about your will. That's more about your action, what you do. Of course, we don't have freedom of action in complete sense, the freedom to literally do anything. But I think, by free will, they're talking just about your internal desires, wants, the things that you choose to do, your more or less your I can't think of the word at the moment. I'm coming up brain dead.
What
but
they're
you're
really talking about is free wanting rather than free will in that sense.
It may be a language barrier, because for me, will would be wanting. It will do as you will, essentially.
To me,
the will
suggests action. So you will something, therefore you go and do it in a sense. So you can say once, you can say action.
I don't see this the same at all.
Question.
Every conversation I've had with theists about free will has centered on the idea that we can choose to do good or we can choose to do evil, and that is something that God chooses not to intervene in, which means we are free to make those choices independent of God's will.
Yeah, once you bring God into it, it just collapses, because their God is a creator. Their God is omniscient. You cannot have an omniscient creator and free will at the same time. It does not make sense, because any action that you take, if he changed, he knew before creating it, and if he created it in a different way, you would take a different action. So you cannot have both of those things. It's logically impossible.
Agreed. I'm not saying I support their argument. I'm saying that that's how they've framed their argument, is in the context of humans doing what humans do is humans' fault, not God's, because we have this free will.
And inherent in the Christian theology is the idea of thought crime as well, which is why, to me, will comes back more to your internal state rather than your actual physical doings. Yes, you don't want to do evil. You don't want to rape, kill, injure, steal. But also there's the adultery, which can be committed even by thinking sexual thoughts, impure thoughts, and, idolizing other gods, or, any of the other many thought crimes that are scattered throughout the Bible.
Yeah, free will is kind of just a way to reconcile blaming the victim with also having the God be or the source of all evil, which is
that I agree with.
Explicitly stated in the Bible. So it's again, it's just a ridiculous question, but at least it sparks some interesting conversation.
That was good.
Number 12 is, how do we account for conscience? They really need to read a book on evolution. The selfish. Okay, how do you guys...
consciousness? Is that what it is?
Conscience.
Conscience. Okay, so guilt, essentially.
I would say it's any species with social groups. There you go. There's your conscience straight away.
Again, evolution, is that?
Yeah.
Looks like, I'm looking at the list, and it looks like 12 and 13 interlink quite nicely.
Yep.
Oh, you see, he's cheating. He's having a preempt at the questions. We weren't supposed to.
I'm cycling down one at a time as we go.
Cheating is an evolutionary advantage.
I think 2% of the population is...
Are more Brads going to start popping up on our... He's going to be the successful one. He's going to slowly take over our spots.
That's using free will, you see.
So, conscience in a nutshell is just the result of the ones that cooperate best succeed. I mean, cooperation is fundamental. It's cooperating atoms that join to form chemicals. It's cooperating cells that create eukaryotic animals like ourselves. So ultimately, cooperation is the best solution. You can't build a space shuttle if just one person is working on their own. You have to have the people with the knowledge to harvest all these different minerals around the place, and you have to get the people with the technical expertise to do each individual little job. everyone working together. So you're just not going to reach any sort of achievement level if you've got a bunch of individuals fighting each other.
I see the weight of conscience as a byproduct of our adaptive empathy.
Yes.
It basically goes into what you're saying. I'm just putting it in different words. It's just a byproduct of our empathy. Even though we're in moments where our conflicting desires win out and we do something that goes against our tendency to have empathy, we may later reflect on it and see that it wasn't the right thing to do when we're in a more rational state of mind, and we can actually see that we've done some harm through our actions that was undue.
Yes, something that Yuval Noah Harari said in 21 Questions for the 21st Century, he pointed out that empathy and conscience and all those elements are actually calculated as well. It's just your brain's internal subconscious calculation that you're not aware of. So when you do rational, logical calculations and you have feelings about things, your feelings are also calculations. It's just something that your mind is doing without your direct control. So one way or another, there is a logical reason behind things like conscience and morality.
That sounds like a split argument. I see the point you're making, and I agree with it that we do those calculations subconsciously sometimes, but there's a much more front-of-mind decision-making process going on sometimes. For example, let's say you're looking outside and you see a bowl of water, and your thought is, I need to bring that bowl of water inside because it's going to breed mosquitoes. So you bring the bowl of water inside, and the next day you go outside and you find a dead bird, which was obviously waiting for some water. Now you feel bad because the bird died because of your action. That's not a calculation. That is empathy, as Kant said.
Sure, though, because the only reason you feel bad is because your brain has done that working out for you.
Well, you can call it a calculation, but the reality of it from my perspective is you have looked at the situation and you have said, well, I intended to do good, but the result was bad, and you regret making that first decision. It is a calculation of sorts.
Yeah, it's not a logical step there. You're making a connection between those two events.
Sure, but the empathy part is saying if I had been the bird, I would have preferred the water to be left out.
Yeah, so that's...
yeah, you'd have to feel bad for the fate of the bird.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is that a calculation, the feeling bad? Is that a choice you make?
That was his point. So not necessarily a choice, but it is he's saying don't discount feelings, because feelings are evolutionary primed. So evolution has shaped those feelings to be able to help you make the best decisions. Now, they do fail on anything more than like a small level. Once you get up to things like tens of millions of people, you can't rely on your empathy anymore, because you need to do different kinds of calculations. But it's wrong to say discard feelings and use logic, because feelings are based on logic.
I'll be back in 2 minutes. You guys carry on.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Do you guys want to go any further on conscience? Because the next question is morality.
Moving on.
The same topic. So number 13. On what basis can we make moral judgments?
Moral judgments. Did it say how do we make moral judgments?
On what basis can we make moral judgments? I would say that moral judgments affect us every time.
Go ahead.
I'm just saying moral judgments affect us. We are directly impacted by every moral judgment we make. So
somebody want to define what a moral judgment is? Because there is an idea in my head of what it is, and I just want to see if everybody else concurs or if I have a different idea. What is a moral judgment?
My understanding of it is my understanding of a moral judgment is any decision that has anything to do with right and wrong behavior. And of course that begs other questions, but
Right, and the sort of hopefully a shortcut we can go through here is that morality is subjective, and the proverbial, from the point of view of a spider, eating a fly is perfectly normal and moral, but from the point of view of the fly, it's chaos.
I actually take the position of Sam Harris from the moral landscape, that we can have objective moral values that can be determined through science.
So we have to define morality before we can measure it. But yeah, I would say morality is intersubjectively defined, and after that has been done, you can then make objective measurements of that morality.
Which is where I began, and the reason I asked the question, because as I read it, there's a great deal of ambiguity contained in that question. How can we make moral judgments? Well, what are they in the context that we're discussing?
Generally, we would say that morality is anything that affects the well-being of conscious creatures, and I think we tend to all agree on that one. An act is moral
Absolutely.
if it improves the well-being or reduces the suffering of conscious creatures.
Well, okay. So a suffering spider is hungry, and from his perspective, eating the fly is perfectly moral, right, rational, and reasonable. From the fly's perspective, it is the opposite. So there's a completely different view of what is moral based on exactly the same set of circumstances and observations.
That's the easy.
Welcome back, Alan.
Quite tempted to launch into the circle of
Thank you.
I think the fly and the spider issue is, I wouldn't say maybe a mischaracterization, but I would say that actions of survival fall under amoral decisions. I don't think they are moral. If I'm in a situation where it's a life or death situation, there are moral and immoral decisions, but there are also amoral decisions. And it has to do, I think, with the weight of the amount of suffering or well-being that is in play.
Okay, let me abstract that one step further. You have a pet tarantula and you have a pet cricket. Which one which one of these moralities are you going to side with here?
That would be, you would have to take, you've got the well-being and suffering of the two pets that you have, and then you have to also consider your well-being and suffering. If you don't have a favorite, if you can't choose a favorite, the one that you would prefer to have, then they're both on equal setting, and losing either one of them would cause you equal amounts of pain or suffering. And of course, either one of them is going to suffer or flourish equally in that situation as well.
I think I actually disagree with that one. I think the spider in that case has a more complex mind than a cricket.
That could be the case. I don't have the factual knowledge of insect thought processes to agree or disagree with you there, but if that's that were the case, I'd agree with you. If a spider has a more complex brain, then yeah, I agree with you.
You take that to an extreme and you say take a bacterium versus a human, so you've got an extremely no brain versus an extremely complex brain, but they're both alive. And obviously we tend to value the human much higher. So if you then take that back down, you've got an arachnid which has got a complex brain that can make a lot more complex decisions and can do more complex calculations, just to the complexity and the size of the brain and so on. And then you've got a cricket which has a much simpler brain. So we tend to value things like you would value a cat higher than you would value, say, a mouse.
I see what you're saying, but I'm still left with my original kind of conundrum, and the inference of your comments is that complexity increases suffering.
That's an interesting question that Dawkins likes to mention several times, where it says, would pain be worse for something with a very simple mind? Because that's all enveloping, because there's no layers. So human experiencing pain can also rationalize things away. So you can have, go to the dentist and that kind of thing. But something with a very simple mind maybe experiences pain much worse, because that's more of its mind.
And that is the problem that I have with the arachnid versus the cricket scenario, is that there was a sort of I wouldn't call it knee-jerk, but a sort of fairly glibly thrown out response that said, well, the cricket's not as smart or not as complex or has a less complex brain, so go ahead and feed it to the spider. And in your comments, you said, but the more complex a creature is, that makes it more valuable in our view of things. Well, if the criteria that we're judging morality by is the degree of suffering of something, then we're making some mistakes here.
That's entirely possible, yes. I don't think we have actually answered that question yet. We've not reached that point where we're able to measure that.
I'd say if we're, because I am defending a point of objective moral standards here. So based on everything you're saying, Brad, those fall under areas under which we don't currently have enough information. So that's an in practice issue, not an in principle issue. That's not an issue in the theory. It's an issue in the applicability of it at this point, given the information that we have.
I'm definitely on board with that.
Okay, because if you give the axiom that if it's a given that more complex organisms are more capable of suffering or experiencing well-being than less complex ones, then it does follow that the spider should eat the cricket rather than the other way around somehow, if we're ignoring the biology of the matter. It would follow at that point. If less complex creatures cannot suffer as much as more complex ones, then the less complex creature should be the one which we put the necessary suffering on. One of them has to die, is the idea.
Actually,
then it should be the less complex one.
Actually, and I see the internet meme every time I say it now. No, in the discussions I've had on this same topic, it isn't a situation in which one possibility is that you feed the cricket to the spider and the other one is where you feed the spider to the cricket.
You don't feed.
The second,
and then the spider dies.
They both die. They both die.
True.
Right. So it's in that scenario, it's a fairly simple moral judgment to make in that there's no superior quality to seeing two creatures die than seeing one creature die.
I can get on board with that. I mean, that, as far as I can tell on the theory I'm, supporting here, that works out as well.
Yeah, it is an extremely complex topic, and that's why I take issue with the question, is because it's asking for a simple answer to an incredibly complex network of sub-questions. And morality itself is subjective. It's subjective depending on your perspective as the person who is being morally judged also. Because we're talking about a moral judgment we might make in terms of a cricket and a spider. But in the context of the question being asked, it's more likely a question of, well, should you kill a guy who killed your wife or not? It's that kind of morality.
Raise the question, if somebody has an IQ of, say, 70 and there's another person with an IQ of 140 and one of them has to live, is that the complexity of the brain that we use as a measurement? Because that's going down a dark path, isn't it?
I believe either one of those brains is equally complex. One is just more trained to function in certain ways. It doesn't have as much knowledge as the other one. That doesn't mean it's less complex. It's the same machine.
There's another question that I like to throw in at this kind of question as well, that's kind of point, which is, say you discovered an extraterrestrial species that had evolved on Earth secretly, and there's only a few of them, there's a small group, but they are twice as complex as humans, they're twice as intelligent as humans, and their diet is only humans.
Oh, I can solve that one right now.
Kill them all.
Death row.
Yeah.
Death row, that's great.
Well, then there's a whole question about capital punishment. But so, if you go down the complexity route, then we would have to value them twice as much as a human.
But then again, you're looking after your own species, so...
Yeah, so do we go for the anthropocentric view, in which case we can't have any other animals wanting to eat humans?
Yeah, you're probably all familiar with the there's a rail engine going down a track, and you have the choice to switch the track and kill X person or Y person. Yeah. I mean, it's a similar argument.
That's actually the perfect example of empathy overriding reason.
Well, I have an insight on the alien situation and see what you guys think about it. Is if this alien race exists, which can only exist by causing that kind of suffering to, even if they are doubly as complex as us, the only way they can survive is by causing that much suffering to us, then it should seem that having them cease to exist would overall increase well-being and decrease suffering.
Or you could grow them some lab humans.
In which case you're arguing for the extinction of humans, because the cause of a large amount of misery in all sorts of species. I think humans are causing the greatest wave of extinction in the history of the world.
Yep. Absolutely. For me, it's not the extinctions that are bad. It's not the fact that those animals won't be there anymore, except for, obviously, the impact that it has on the ecosystem. And that's kind of the argument I was getting to with the aliens, is if we stop feeding them, if we defend ourselves and let them die of starvation, their line ends. We continue to go on being well. They no longer exist causing us suffering, and they no longer exist to suffer either. So the net balance is less suffering. Because obviously they couldn't exist if we stopped existing. So that would just be a continuous loop of suffering for as long as the both of us exist.
Yeah, but say humans can experience well-being more than, say, bacteria, if we covered the Earth in bacteria, because they don't have brain. So if you have an alien species that has twice the capacity to experience well-being, would it not be better to populate the Earth with them?
Seems like that's sliding down a slope into a numbers game. If there's if there's 100 humans and there's 10,000 of them,
so if
they'll die anyway. It's kind of like the cricket and the spider.
Maximize well-being or minimize suffering, both of those lead to problems.
Yes.
You end up with a sort of a balance problem. And this is something that has been argued back and forth in ethical philosophy for a very long time.
As long as
we're going to solve it here and now, but it's an interesting thing to raise the questions and get people thinking about. So I think we might have already covered some of these next questions. Number 14 is, why does suffering matter? I can answer that one, because it's me.
Because subjective experience, if it exists, I can't think of the right way to word that. I should step back for a second and think of how I can word that.
So look at it this way. What gives life meaning? I give my life meaning. So suffering matters to me because it affects me. And then once you go into suffering for other people, well, that'll affect your empathy. An increased amount of suffering is just going to be worse for you in the long run because we're cooperative beings, for example. Even if you didn't have empathy,
I'm going to go ahead and say this, because I think I put it in words here, it's tautologous. If we're talking about morality, suffering is what matters.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tautology. That's what is involved in the conversation of morality, until somebody else tries to define it in some other way. But right now, that's the definition we're working on. It's like having a language and judging somebody's proper or improper use of the language. Who's to say that particular string of words is incorrect grammar? Well, the rules that we've invented for our language dictate that this is an incorrect sentence. And the same goes for morality. We look at it as a system that dictates right and wrong behavior regarding the well-being and suffering of sentient beings. So that's what matters when we're discussing morality.
Yeah, it's the definition of the word matter and the definition of the word suffering. So that kind of answers itself. Next question is number 15. Why do human beings matter? Which I think is pretty much the same question. Because we are human beings, therefore we value ourselves.
Exactly.
You really got to start with these questions with a little bit different frame, I think. When you say, why do human beings matter? Well, the sort of corollary question is, to whom?
Yeah, well, we're the only ones making these judgment calls, unless you count dogs.
Okay. Well, that's sort of a self-answering question then. But in a context where it's being asked by a Christian who says atheists can't answer this, it seems like there's an implicit answer on the theist side.
Oh yeah, they would say because it's divinely ordained or something. But then they're thinking that it matters in the mind of something that doesn't have a mind.
I mean, I'm kind of unclear as to where that question is supposed to go. Why do human beings matter to who? To us? To them? To gods? To what? And in the context it's being asked, I don't think there's any sense to be made of the question.
Yeah, it's just if you can ask a nonsense question, then I guess someone can answer it. But then we become Christians, so it goes nowhere. You might as well ask a question. Why doesn't yellow make a sound?
Wrong wavelength.
Let's try it. Number 16. Why care about justice? How would a Christian answer? Because my God told me to.
Seems redundant. I thought we already covered that more or less in 12 and 13.
In terms of morality, yeah. So we take justice just to mean enforcing morality.
Yeah.
Then that pretty much answers itself, because a society in which things are not moral, then it all goes wrong anyway. So you end up with more suffering and more chaos.
Yeah, I mean, I'll bite on that and say justice matters because, well, more or less what you just said, it enforces morality. There's retributive justice and there's preventative justice. I forget the exact terms for that. Hopefully that's not too far off. But the idea is you're either punishing that person for being immoral or breaking the laws, or you're setting the precedent to show others you don't behave this way, or this is what happens. And it's just to kind of generally help sculpt society into the most effective tool for promoting well-being.
Yeah, ultimately, all punishment should be correctional punishment. It should either help that person change their behavior or help other people change their behavior as well to avoid lapses in morality.
Agreed.
So why care about justice? Because it directly affects you. That's why you should care about anything. I mean, even things that people don't think affect them ultimately do, because all of society in general affects you. That's why xenophobic sort of isolation policies ultimately don't work, because the world is all interconnected. That was the justice question, wasn't it? These are all the same kind of question. 17 is, how do we account for the almost universal belief in the supernatural? That's pretty easy. Lapses in logic, flaws in design.
That's pretty much it. I would say indoctrination.
You've also got mimetic evolution.
Yes.
The most intolerant, most viral meme is the one that comes out on top, and there are quite a few different religions that operate that way by indoctrinating the minds of children, spreading through violence, spreading through cultural saturation, spreading through missionaries.
I think I would like to ask the theist. There may be what you call an almost universal belief in the supernatural, but the belief is in entirely different types of supernatural things in entirely different ways. So if what they believe is correct, why are there so many differences?
Yeah, you could turn that one around quite easily. Why do people believe in magic?
I'll give an alternative but similar answer, and it may kind of just be another way of stating something somebody else already said, but my answer to the reason for widespread belief in the supernatural is just general ignorance. We started, as a species, we started off in ignorance. We didn't know why anything. It just all was, and we were trying to figure it out. And it all just seems so magnificent and magical when you can't understand what's happening. So from the beginning, magic and the supernatural were the only answers. a lot of us have figured out that they're actually not the right answers, and a lot of us have not.
Yeah, it goes back to apophenia, the pattern recognition errors, where I think it was Michael Shermer's example, where if you were sensing some rustling in the bushes and there were two different types of person, one thought that's a predator that's going to try and kill me, another person thought that's just the wind. The person who falsely thought it was the wind when it was a predator got eaten. So we went for the margin of error slightly on the side of being able to assign agency to things when there wasn't agency, more often than not. Not too much, where if we always assigned agency to things, we'd be jumping at everything. But there was a slight tilt in that direction, that to be a little bit more paranoid and to assign agency to things that don't actually have anything there. And then when you see the wind moving things and you don't know what it is, because we didn't discover that air was made of particles until much later, people invented air gods. Like, is it Elohim? I forget exactly which one, but Yahweh is a composite of two different gods. One is El, which is like an air god, and then Yahweh is like the volcano god of blood.
That's what I remember hearing as well. So
yeah, so
probably got that.
You start attributing events. It's just a way of trying to get control over the universe as well. Just trying to make your mark where you don't understand why lightning bolts come out of the sky sometimes. So you try and do whatever you can, and then if you find a correlation, even if it's not causation, you still think that you've changed something.
Yeah, it's a very obvious example of that is the common practice of rain dancing. We dance in the right way, and the rain will come.
Yep.
Absolutely no proof to show that that's actually, or no evidence to back that up. It's just maybe one time in the past they did a special dance and it rained, and they thought, hey, we do this dance and the rain will come.
And what happens, of course, if the rain doesn't come, then they assume that their enemies in the nearby tribe are doing an opposite kind of dance, and they go and butcher them.
Exactly.
That or it's time to change gods.
No, you can't go changing gods.
No, but they do, didn't they?
So it used to be a lot more common to change religions and to have multiple religions, in particular, like Greco-Roman history, where they had multiple gods they'd pray to for different things, up until the evil Abrahamic religions started spreading around and preaching that you could only have the one god or you'd be killed. So yeah, that happened. So it looks like the Christians don't have an answer for this one either. So the rain dance is a perfect example. Why is that so prevalent? You can't really answer that one.
Not a chance.
Yeah. So the obvious thing is just flaws in human reasoning. That's why we need logic. That's why we need to test things. That's why the scientific method is so successful, because it overcomes human flaws.
I apologize if this is redundant. I was away from the keyboard a little bit, but belief in something, no matter how widespread, is not proof of it. So that's a argumentum ad populum fallacy in the first place. And the second thing I would say is a lot of people believe that if they pray hard enough, they're going to win the lottery.
Imagine if everyone did. That happened to Bruce Almighty, I think.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
it wasn't a happy outcome.
Yeah, they all won $17.
That's just it. And you obviously get to this point where if you believe in this supernatural, then you necessarily buy into a lot of other dogma that goes with it. And much of that dogma has either already been disproved or is logically fallacious. So the number of people that believe silly things doesn't convince me to believe any of them.
Yeah, I was going to add that it's an ad populum fallacy as well. Yeah. Straight away, but it's...
Yeah, but I got there first.
Well done.
Slow to the draw.
Okay, well, that wrecks that one as well. A shame we couldn't leave any of these. It would have been nice to have something difficult. Number 18 is, how do we know the supernatural does not exist? I'd say by definition.
We don't, but there's no definitive evidence that it does, and I'm disinclined to entertain things that ask me to prove a negative.
As far as I know, the supernatural is impossible. The reason it is supernatural is because it can't happen.
It's supernatural if and only if it defies the laws of nature.
Yeah, which
we say is impossible. Of course, if you're going to take their claim seriously, their claim is, well, yeah, you think it's impossible, but there is something out there that is able to bend those rules, break those rules. That's what they're saying. That's the claim. So I think the honest answer is we don't know, but you haven't given me a reason to think that it does exist. So far, there is no valid or sound reason to think that the supernatural does in fact exist. We can't be asked to explain how we know it doesn't exist. You need to substantiate your claim that it does exist because it's not apparent. It hasn't been widely researched. There's no validity to it at all at this point.
I'd like to flip a little bit, and maybe it's a devil's advocate thing. I don't know. You decide. There is something I can point to which, at the moment, we might classify as supernatural. Spooky action at a distance.
What, quantum entanglement?
Specifically, the fact that we cannot explain exactly the mechanism by which an entangled particle will mirror the particle it's entangled with. We don't know how that works. But this is not to say it is inevitably a supernatural thing. It's supernatural at the moment, but so was lightning once.
Yeah, and the track record is 100% on the side of natural.
Yeah, one of the arguments I like to use a lot, and it's, I'm guilty of overusing it, I'm sure, is that there's not been a single incidence of something that I can recall in which we once had a scientific explanation for something that has since been replaced with a supernatural one.
Yeah, it's something.
And that is a death blow of a point, honestly.
Yeah, so if you go to Bayesian reasoning, then you've got there isn't even a single case. So you've got to have every single side land on the point of naturalism.
That brings to mind for me one of the most common problems I have when you ask, not in an actual debate setting generally, but if you one-on-one, if you're speaking to somebody who is a theist and you ask them, can you explain to me the reason you believe? More than likely, at least in my experience, I should qualify that, what usually comes up is some sort of medical miracle in their family, some sort of highly improbable, we don't understand. They said this person was going to die, or they would never walk again, they'd never speak again, and here they are, they're fine, they're alive, we don't, and scientists, the doctors, they just can't explain it. And one of the things I've come to say is, I try to start off with a kind of celebrating the well-being of the person they're mentioning. Well, I'm glad this person is okay, but medical science is the youngest science that we have proper, other than maybe quantum physics. It's one of, I should say one of, not the, but it's one of the youngest, one of the branches of science that I think we still have a long way to go before we're in a good place of understanding. We do understand a lot. We can do a lot. What's that?
You've got Galen and Hippocrates. I mean, medical science goes well back, and it was one of the first things we were really interested in.
Sure, but it wasn't actually scientific in its nature. It was in that foreshadowing sense, but not, since the Enlightenment, I should say. It's one of the youngest ones to actually be reformed since the Enlightenment, with Pasteur kind of sorting that whole mess out.
You could say the turning point would be the double-blind trial, I think. That makes a huge difference.
And since that time, we've made a lot of progress. But, I mean, in a lot of ways, this science is in its infancy. So, I mean, if you look at physics in comparison, I would say it's older. I would say it's been under careful scrutiny longer. And something like the motions of the planets were once attributed to miracles. Like, how do they move that way? That's freaking crazy. Obviously, it's the gods or God doing something up there. Oh, well, just fast forward time here. I can easily see how in 20, 30, 40, 100 years or whatever, we're going to look back at these cases of spontaneous remission and recovery that seem inexplicable right now and say, well, no shit, here's the way that our bodies work. So we could have really seen this coming if we had known what we know now, you know?
Yeah, and that's the way all these arguments go. It's just an argument from ignorance. We don't understand this, therefore it's magic.
Absolutely.
I think, as Aaron Ra said, there's never been one time in the history of history when religion turned out to be right. It's just wrecked every single case. And in particular, you notice that the way they hide these things is in like cutting edge medicine. They'll go to quantum mechanics and they'll go to the origins of the universe. They try to hide their gods in the places we haven't fully fleshed out our knowledge yet. So it's all about ignorance.
God of the gaps again.
I absolutely agree. And it's my biggest peeve of all these arguments, because you can't come up with an answer, and yet I can imagine a way in which God does answer it, so therefore God is the answer. Imagining a way in which, oh, well, God is an uncreated being that can create everything, so therefore he's the uncreated thing which created the universe. Ta-da! You haven't actually demonstrated anything except for your ability to make up definitions and make them fit what we observe.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen an argument for gods that was not begging the question.
Oh, that's a happy child.
Yep, she is ready. Yeah, so actually I think I'm gonna go ahead and have to check out here.
Oh, yeah,
now she's unhappy. So yeah, it was a great conversation. I guess you guys can finish out the last couple points without me. We'll have to plan another one of these, come up with some other rabbit hole to go down one of these days here soon. This was
great
fun.
to have you, and I'm glad the tech worked out all right. You were able to get online and we can hear your voice great.
Oh yeah, I wasn't sure if it would work on the phone, but apparently it's working great. So we're set up for another one of these someday soon. So
yeah,
will you gentlemen have fun?
Have fun.
What was that?
To find something you disagree with me on, we'll shout at each other.
That'll be great. We need to locate one of those things in the meantime. All right, well, you guys have fun, flesh out these last couple ones, and maybe I'll try to watch it later once it's all finalized.
Did you get to hear the weirdness of your own voice?
That should be real fun, especially since I already know I don't like my voice.
You sound fine. Okay, thanks.
All right, guys.
Right.
Have a good one.
Cheers.
See you later.
So that was supernatural. Yeah, so by definition, the supernatural doesn't exist because that's literally what it means. Stuff that doesn't exist.
Correct. Except for that bump in the night.
Yes, stuff that we're still ignorant about.
Yeah, and the scratches on the window.
So we've got number 19. How can we know if there is conscious existence after death? Easy. Scan the brain of someone who's dead.
Yeah. This brings in the soul again, isn't it? Life after death.
This is the fear of death. It's using fear to try and force people into religions, isn't it? This is a question for believers. This isn't a question for atheists.
No.
I mean, so to be fair, you can be an atheist and believe in life after death. You just wouldn't have to associate it with God.
Yeah, well, if take a Buddhist, they're supposedly atheists. They don't believe in a God, but they believe in life after death, reincarnation. So well.
Actually, Buddhism does have a lot of gods. If you go to the original, like the old school Buddhism, not the stuff they export as philosophy. So Buddhism itself does actually have many
gods. Yeah, because Buddha had a fight with a god anyway, when he was fasting, but you could realize that when he was fasting, he had a fight with a god. That was because he was delirious.
I was thinking just about the prayer wheels, setting up a water wheel so that it recites prayers by symbols engraved on it, and
worry beads as well.
Flags that flap and make prayers in the wind, and it is still religion. It's just that part of it tends not to get exported.
Yeah, well, apparently atheism is also religion.
Well, there are atheistic religions in a sense, but I tend to think of religion as specifically the worships of gods. So
correct, yeah. Well,
say
that's
atheistic religion's impossible.
that's what my definition of religion is belief in God or gods.
Yeah, I think once you take the gods out of it, you've stepped into ideology there.
Yeah, ideology,
Brad,
philosophy. Brad seems to have.
might have lost him.
I'm still here.
Cool. Just checking that you hadn't crashed out.
No, not yet.
By the way, when I cough, I'm switching off my mic. Can you hear me coughing?
We heard you coughing that time, but it's not serious.
That's annoying. It looks like my mute isn't working.
Yeah, I'm working a couple of other things here, and I'm sort of muting myself, and I'll probably be appearing away from keyboard for you, but I will tell you before I leave.
Yeah, no worries. We're pretty much near the end of this recording anyway. I think we've only got the one left, although it might be a big one.
And you reckon it's a big one?
Yeah, number 20 is what accounts for the empty tomb, resurrection appearances, and growth of the church. And I'm going to say, begging the question.
Yeah. The anything in the growth of the church is something you can look at, but
the Triumph of Christianity by Bart Ehrman is going to cover that one, isn't it? I haven't read that one yet, but as far as I understand
that covers it pretty well.
Richard Carrier's Not the Impossible Faith already went over quite thoroughly.
It's been pretty well covered, and it's a historic fact. So there's no question about how Christianity grew.
Yeah, it grew about the same rate as Mormonism and the same rate as any other cult, really.
Yeah. The biggest thing was stopping bits of your penis getting cut off that probably caused more of the pagans to come across.
Yes, Paul.
Yeah, Paul. Yeah, Paul has got a lot to answer for.
To be fair, I think Paul softened it up a fair bit. His attitude to women was not as bad as the other cult leaders, I think. Yeah,
he did soften it up, but that's just it. He did soften it up. That's why it grew. If he didn't soften it up, it wouldn't have. It would have died out.
Imagine if they'd had Mosaic law and they'd have to stone everyone who didn't believe in their God.
Exactly.
It's almost as if there's a tendency in religions to pander to whatever makes the biggest congregation.
Whatever makes the most money.
Oh, yeah, that too.
Well, that was one of the reasons why Christianity took off as well. Was Constantine had a good old time taking out a lot of the riches from the pagans, because their temples and that was pretty full of gold and gemstones and all sorts. So it was a good get rich quick.
Well, when cults start out, you could attribute the way they work to the leader, the person who invented the meme, or adapted an existing one. But when it turns from a cult into a religion, at that point, it's the meme itself that's taking over. So it adapts and worms its way into the minds of everyone. So there comes a point where you can't really blame an individual for it anymore because it's taken on a life of its own and evolved.
Correct, because I think Christianity as well just grew. 2 or 3 people were converted, and that sort of convert more family members. It wasn't such as a crusade as such, getting them Christianity to grow. It was the slow growth. It was a very slow growth, but it certainly took off.
Yeah, it was Constantine was the massive turning point, I think. So.
Yeah, Constantine had a lot to do with it when it did. Although it actually took off later than that. Really, we really got started because we still went. They still went back.
The emperor after that, or was it?
Well, there was.
It was the one where it became illegal not to be a Christian.
That was the one after. Yeah, that was the third one along because.
Was it like Constantine II or something?
Something like that. But there was also a reverse. They reverted one of the emperors actually reverted back to paganism, and he outlawed Christianity. So for that matter of 2 years, that is actually when, except for Nero, when Christians were actually persecuted. Other than that, there was hardly any.
His name.
Yeah, there was hardly any persecution per se in
Yeah, later Christians sort of blew that out of proportion, I think.
Yeah, they persecuted
Nero
Christians.
never heard of a Christian.
Yeah.
So we've got the growth of the church there, going backwards through it. Resurrection appearances. We've got example from Paul saying that Peter saw one.
Yeah,
We've got a single account basically.
Paul again, as far as I can see, he never actually he only knew a spiritual Jesus, not the Jesus of man. He never mentions. He never knew Jesus. He doesn't talk anything about Jesus' life. Nothing about.
Don't know where Brad stands on the whole historicism, mysticism thing on Jesus, actually.
Used to, of course, at the very beginning, I thought, yeah, of course, so many people in the world wouldn't be talking about this as if it happened. If it didn't, then somebody questioned the historicity, and I kind of laughed at him and went to try and prove them wrong and started digging and getting deeper and deeper. And the further I dug, the more I struggled to find anything I could point at and say, yep, this definitely is some sort of evidence. The closest you get to, of course, is Josephus. And it's pretty obvious to me from the research I've done on that. It's fraudulent. So, yeah, historicity, I'm in grave doubt.
Yeah, but Josephus and Tacitus.
Tacitus,
that's the one.
yeah.
I mean, they weren't eyewitnesses. They weren't even, it's just hearsay that they were talking about. So, I mean, there again is you can't class that. Even if he did say, even Josephus did mention Christ, or the special Christ that did the, if you can call him a man sort of story. It still makes no difference. It still makes
the hearsay from things Christians were repeating anyway, because we know Tacitus probably got his information from Pliny, and you've got Josephus is blatantly a forgery. It's not even a question anymore about that.
yeah.
Also, if you've got Christian apologists from the 3rd century and so on, so you've got Origen, for example, writing a century or so later, and he read Tacitus, he read Josephus, and it didn't notice those massive adverts for Jesus.
Because they weren't there, were they?
They weren't there. They didn't exist until around Eusebius's time.
Yes, correct. Eusebius rewrote quite a bit of the Christian history.
Yeah, and there was some question about an Aramaic manuscript for Josephus, but that was demonstrated by what was the name? Alice or Alison? It was somebody who went through that and demonstrated that it came from Eusebius's. So there's really no doubt there that Josephus and possibly Tacitus are forgeries. But even if they weren't forgeries, it's not relevant.
It's not relevant. I mean, Pliny the Younger, I mean, it's his father that was around, would have been around during Christ's time. And the elder never wrote anything. Christ, not one word. And he was there while this was all supposed to be going on. His son mentions it, but not him.
Yeah, it's entirely possible that the mention in Pliny is genuine, but then he just says, look at the ridiculous things these Christians believed.
Yeah. But then again, that is hearsay again. He's heard it from Christians. And I think a lot of the writing afterwards was all just hearsay, what they heard from Christians, and they were just repeating what was heard, what they knew, what the Christians believed in. It's not necessarily was fact.
Yeah, so resurrection appearances specifically. Basically, we've got Paul's word saying that Peter saw Jesus in a vision, and then other people started seeing Jesus in visions, presumably having heard that and thought, oh, I better start having visions of Jesus then.
Yeah.
And then we've got Paul's transformation, which, I mean, some people think he had a stroke, but it's possible that he was lying about it and just using it to get into the cult. I personally think that his actions in persecuting the church had led to guilt, and then he found out enough about it from questioning Christians that he came up with thinking this is actually quite a good idea, this could actually be true. And then that combination of guilt and stress and just his knowledge of the scriptures started to make him hallucinate it as well, because you do have the kind of person who is religious or a religious leader or a zealot like Paul was pretty heavily involved in there to be persecuting Christians in the first place, was also the kind of person that was more prone to having visions, because schizotypals were just more accepted at the time.
Yeah, there was some say that he may have had epileptic fits or whatever the case may be.
Temporal lobe epilepsy, I think, is the usual one.
One, yeah. But it seems so strange that he chooses the wilderness for Christ to sort of appear.
But do you mean the Damascus Road experience?
Yes,
I don't think the Acts account has anything to do with anything Paul ever had.
No, I know, but this is just but this is just the thing that just springs to mind, because if you think about it, well, the Gospels, Jesus warns about somebody coming in his name in the wilderness, and here's Paul saying Jesus came in the wilderness. So it's a good sort of argument to throw back at a Christian.
Yeah. So resurrection appearances, we've got one case, maybe two, where people have claimed to have visions of Jesus. Nobody has ever claimed to physically see Jesus, as far as
correct. Yeah.
We've got a few fictional accounts from later that copy each other, but not relevant. They weren't even like the same lifetime. And then the other part was the empty tomb. What empty tomb?
Yeah.
Oh, come on. Empty tombs exist all over the planet.
I know.
And the usual.
Up to one, it's going, look, this tomb's empty.
The most usual cause of an empty tomb is a grave robber opened the tomb to take out the valuables and left it open, and animals took the body out.
Yeah, I don't think there even was a tomb. There's never Jesus in a tomb.
Well, they haven't found a tomb, have they?
I agree with all of what you're saying. I'm just saying that even if you found an empty tomb, it wouldn't exactly prove a lot.
About a dozen Jesus tombs so far.
Yeah. It's an extremely common phenomenon, and do a little reading on the problems faced by archaeologists in Egypt trying to find an intact tomb.
Well, it's just dodgy anyway. So the first case of a tomb actually being mentioned is in Mark. And in Mark, he mentions a tombstone being rolled away, which at the time of Jesus didn't have round tombstones. That was something only the elites. They'd only just come up with that idea, basically, by that point. And there was no way that was going to be the kind of tomb. So Mark's writing an anachronism because at the time he's writing, that's quite common. But he hasn't realized that at the time Jesus was alleged to have died, that wasn't a thing.
Right.
So it's gone straight from the start. The story makes no sense.
Yeah, well, what you wrote in 70 AD, wasn't it? BCE. I mean CE.
71 to 73.
So yeah,
expecting the world to end in 74, most likely.
Yeah.
And then he got embarrassed about that and started taking out all the stuff about the world ending.
Any day now.
Yeah. 2,000 years later, any day.
Any day.
The rapture people are hilarious. Okay, so I think we thoroughly answered every single question, but apparently we can't answer. It says struggle to answer, and some of them are hard. The morality stuff.
Yeah, to be fair, I mean, if you're going to say, well, an atheist can't answer this question, the absence of ability to answer a question doesn't imply that the question is unanswerable. It just means that if you ask the average atheist how many stars there are in the universe, I don't know. There's definitely a number. There's definitely a well, you can approximate it.
Yeah.
You could approximate it, but it doesn't mean there's no answer, and it doesn't mean my not knowing that answer has any relevance.
Christians can't answer these either.
Well, quite, or at least if they do, then it's the God did it, and
very trite, yeah,
with basically no supporting evidence at all. In fact, quite
one
often.
Logical conclusion: if we can answer these, we're not atheists.
Yeah. Nice.
Oh, logic. Wow.
Well, dead silence now. Well, I think we came to the end of the questions.
I think so. I think we should probably sign off because nobody's going to want to watch like a 4-hour long video or whatever. But
what happened to your volume?
had a lot of fun chatting with you guys, and it was interesting coming up with these talking points as well. So I think we should do more stuff like this because it brings up some really interesting questions, even though the questions themselves aren't interesting, but we can spin off of them.
Yeah. I think it's been quite pleasant to have more than just two people to bounce things off each other. Been quite enjoyable. And well, and Kent's young daughter giving her mouthful as well.
Yes, I really appreciated Kent's input because he's really given this stuff a lot of thought, and you can tell he's gone over it with a fine-tooth comb as well.
Yeah. Well, he's also used to doing videos. He's got his own channel, so
yes,
it's pretty good.
Yeah,
pretty good stuff come through that one.
I might add that in the video description actually.
Yeah. He's actually got some good ones out there. Yeah.
Okay, I am going to sign off the video here, and we'll look forward to doing our next one.
Yep.
Say goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
I should have known you bastards to do that.
As you're trying to cut off.